Captain Rebecca Martinez had been flying F-22 Raptors for 8 years, but she'd never encountered anything like this before. The morning briefing at Nellis Air Force Base had been routine until Colonel Davidson dropped the bombshell. An unauthorized aircraft had been detected over restricted airspace near Area 51, and it wasn't responding to radio communications. The Pentagon wanted it intercepted immediately. Rebecca strapped herself into the cockpit of her F-22, her wingman Lieutenant Jake Thompson beside her in his own aircraft. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly below as they climbed to 30,000 feet. The mysterious aircraft appeared on their radar as a small blip, moving erratically through the restricted zone. Eagle 1, this is control, crackled through her headset. Target is holding steady at Angels 15, approximately 40 miles northeast of your position. Rebecca adjusted her flight path, the sophisticated avionics systems of the Raptor guiding her toward the intruder. As they closed the distance, she could make out the shape of what appeared to be a modified civilian aircraft, painted in non-reflective gray. It was definitely not military issue. Control, Eagle 1. I have visual on the target. It's a civilian aircraft, possibly a modified Cessna Citation. No visible markings or identification. Roger, Eagle 1. Orders remain the same. Force the aircraft to land or disable it if necessary. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Those were shoot-to-kill orders disguised in military jargon. She'd been in the Air Force long enough to know what disable meant when it came to aircraft that refused to comply. But something about this situation felt wrong. The aircraft wasn't acting aggressively or threatening. It was simply flying in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Eagle 2 moved to flanking position, she radioed to Jake. I'm going to try visual contact with the pilot. As Rebecca maneuvered her F-22 closer to the civilian aircraft, she could see into the cockpit. The pilot was a woman, probably in her 30s, with short dark hair. She was wearing what looked like a flight suit, but not military issue. The woman seemed to notice the F-22 approaching and began making gestures with her hands. At first, Rebecca thought the pilot was trying to surrender or communicate distress. But as she watched more carefully, she realized the woman was making very specific, rhythmic movements with a flashlight. The pattern was too deliberate to be random panic. Control, Eagle 1. The pilot appears to be attempting to communicate. Eagle 1, you have your orders. The aircraft has violated restricted airspace and failed to respond to radio communications. Proceed with intercept protocols. Rebecca's training told her to follow orders, but her instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. The woman in the cockpit continued her precise light signals, and suddenly Rebecca's blood turned to ice. She recognized the pattern. It was Morse code. The pilot was flashing a message over and over again. Rebecca's mind raced as she translated the dots and dashes. The message was coordinates, but not just any coordinates. These were the exact location of a classified military facility that shouldn't exist on any official records. "Jake, are you seeing this?" Rebecca whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible. "Seeing what, Beck?" "I just see some crazy civilian who wandered into the wrong airspace." Rebecca's heart pounded as she realized the implications. This wasn't just a lost pilot. This woman knew something she wasn't supposed to know, and now she was risking her life to communicate it. The coordinates she was flashing corresponded to a location that had been in the news recently, connected to missing persons reports and strange government denials. Control. Eagle 1 requesting clarification on rules of engagement. Eagle 1, you are cleared to engage. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. Rebecca's finger hovered over the weapons systems, but she couldn't bring herself to pull the trigger. The woman in the cockpit was still flashing her message, tears streaming down her face. She knew she was about to die, but she was still trying to get the truth out. The coordinates burned in Rebecca's memory as she made a decision that would change everything. Rebecca broke radio silence and contacted Jake on a secure channel they'd used during training exercises. "Jake, I need you to record everything that's happening right now. Can you do that without Control knowing?" "Beck, what's going on? You're starting to worry me." "Just trust me and start recording. This isn't what they told us it was." Rebecca maneuvered her F-22 closer to the civilian aircraft, close enough to clearly see the pilot's face. The woman was young, maybe 28, with the kind of determined expression Rebecca had seen on whistleblowers in documentaries. She was still flashing the coordinates, but now she was also holding up what looked like a photograph. Rebecca couldn't make out the details of the photograph, but she could see it showed some kind of facility with several people in what appeared to be containment suits. The woman pointed to the photo, then to the coordinates she was flashing, then made a gesture across her throat. "Control, Eagle 1. I need to report unusual behavior from the target aircraft." "Eagle 1, elaborate." Rebecca's mind raced. She couldn't tell Control what she was really seeing without potentially putting the civilian pilot in even more danger. But she also couldn't just follow orders and eliminate what might be the only person willing to expose a cover-up. "The pilot appears to be experiencing some kind of medical emergency. She's making erratic movements and seems to be in distress." "Eagle 1, that doesn't change your orders. The aircraft is still in violation of restricted airspace." Rebecca watched as the woman in the cockpit suddenly stopped flashing her message and began frantically pointing downward. Following her gaze, Rebecca saw something that made her stomach drop. Far below, barely visible in the desert, was a convoy of black vehicles racing toward their position. The civilian pilot grabbed what looked like a stack of documents from beside her seat and held them up to the window. Even from her distance, Rebecca could see they were stamped with official government seals. The woman then made a universal gesture, pointing to the documents, then to Rebecca, then to the media outlets' call signs she began flashing in Morse code. Control, Eagle 1. I'm reading unusual electromagnetic interference from the target aircraft. My weapons systems are showing some kind of malfunction. It was a lie, but Rebecca needed more time to think. The woman in the cockpit was now holding up what appeared to be a military ID card, but it didn't look like any branch Rebecca recognized. The photo showed the same woman, but in a different uniform, standing in what looked like an underground facility. Eagle 1, run a full systems diagnostic and prepare for manual override if necessary. Rebecca's hands shook as she realized the full scope of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just about restricted airspace or a confused civilian pilot. This was about something much bigger, and the woman in that cockpit was risking everything to expose it. The civilian aircraft suddenly began ascending, and Rebecca could see the pilot making new gestures. She was pointing to her radio, then to Rebecca, then making a writing motion. Rebecca understood immediately. The woman wanted her to write down what she was about to transmit. "Jake, are you still recording?" "Every second, Beck. But I'm getting some weird radio chatter on the emergency frequencies. Sounds like they're scrambling ground units." Rebecca's blood ran cold as she realized time was running out. Whatever this woman was trying to expose, powerful people were mobilizing to stop her. The coordinates she had flashed were just the beginning. The civilian pilot suddenly cut her engine and began gliding downward, but she was still signaling frantically. Now she was flashing new coordinates, different from the first set. Then a date from 3 weeks ago. Then what looked like a casualty count. Rebecca felt sick as the pieces began falling into place. 3 weeks ago, there had been reports of a missing research team from the University of Nevada. The official story was that they had gotten lost during a geological survey and died of exposure. But these coordinates suggested something very different. Control, Eagle 1. Target aircraft is descending rapidly. Appears to be experiencing engine failure. Eagle 1, maintain your intercept course. Do not allow the aircraft to land outside of designated areas. Rebecca watched in horror as she realized what Control was really saying. They didn't want this woman to survive long enough to talk to anyone. The designated areas were military zones where any survivors could be contained and silenced. The civilian pilot must have understood this too, because she suddenly made a decision that changed everything. Instead of trying to land safely, she began steering her aircraft toward a populated area about 20 miles away. She was going to force a crash landing near witnesses. Control, Eagle 1. Target is heading toward civilian population centers. I need immediate guidance on rules of engagement. Eagle 1. You are authorized to use any means necessary to prevent that aircraft from reaching populated areas. Rebecca's finger moved to the weapon's trigger, but she couldn't bring herself to fire. The woman in the cockpit was looking directly at her now, no longer flashing signals, but simply mouthing words that Rebecca could read on her lips. Tell them what you saw. The civilian aircraft was now too low for Rebecca to safely engage without risking debris falling on innocent people below. She had to make a choice that would define not just her career, but her conscience for the rest of her life. Rebecca made a split-second decision that went against everything she had been trained to do. Instead of firing on the civilian aircraft, she activated her emergency beacon and began transmitting on all civilian frequencies. This is United States Air Force Captain Rebecca Martinez. Call sign Eagle 1. I am witnessing what appears to be the attempted murder of a civilian pilot who was trying to expose classified information about missing persons. I am transmitting coordinates and details on emergency frequency 121.5. The response from control was immediate and furious. Eagle 1, you are ordered to cease all unauthorized transmissions immediately and return to base. But Rebecca continued broadcasting, reading out the coordinates the civilian pilot had flashed, the dates, and everything else she had witnessed. She knew her career was over, but she also knew that staying silent would make her complicit in whatever cover-up was happening. The civilian aircraft managed to make an emergency landing in a field just outside a small town called Desert Springs. Rebecca watched as the pilot stumbled out of the cockpit, clutching the documents she had been holding. Even from her altitude, Rebecca could see the woman was injured but alive. Jake, please tell me you got all of that on recording. Every single second, Beck. My God, what have we stumbled into? Rebecca's radio crackled with increasingly frantic orders to return to base immediately, but she ignored them. Instead, she circled the crash site until she saw local emergency responders arriving. Only then did she feel safe enough to turn back toward Nellie's. The flight back to base was the longest of Rebecca's life. She knew that the moment she landed, she would be arrested, court-martialed, and probably imprisoned. But she also knew that the woman in that civilian aircraft had chosen to risk everything to expose the truth, and Rebecca couldn't live with herself if she had just followed orders and killed her. As Nellie's Air Force Base came into view, Rebecca could see the unusual activity on the tarmac. There were far more security personnel than normal, and several black SUVs that definitely weren't part of the standard base vehicle pool. She was flying into what was essentially a trap. Control, Eagle 1 approaching for landing. Eagle 1, you are directed to land on runway 07 and taxi to hangar 12. You will be met by security personnel. Rebecca took a deep breath and began her descent. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew she had done the right thing. The coordinates, the dates, the photographs, the documents, all of it was now in the hands of civilian authorities thanks to her unauthorized broadcast. As her F-22 touched down on the runway, Rebecca said a silent prayer for the brave woman who had risked everything to flash those coordinates in Morse code. She had no idea if the truth would ever come out, but at least now it had a chance. The aircraft rolled to a stop in front of Hangar 12, and Rebecca could see armed security personnel surrounding her plane. As she went through the shutdown procedures, she noticed Jake's F-22 being directed to a different hangar. They were being separated immediately. Rebecca climbed out of her cockpit and was immediately surrounded by security personnel. A man in a dark suit approached her, flashing credentials she couldn't quite read. "Captain Martinez, you're under arrest for violation of the Espionage Act, insubordination, and treason. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Rebecca felt a strange sense of peace. She had looked into the eyes of that civilian pilot and seen desperation, terror, and absolute determination to expose the truth. Whatever happened to her now, she had chosen to stand with the truth instead of following orders blindly. The man in the dark suit leaned close to her ear as they walked toward the waiting SUV. "You have no idea what you've just done, Captain. That woman you saved was a terrorist trying to expose classified national security operations." Rebecca looked him straight in the eye. "If protecting missing persons investigations is terrorism, then maybe we need to reconsider who the real terrorists are." The SUV doors slammed shut, and Rebecca was driven away from the only life she had ever known. But as they passed the main gate of Nellie's Air Force Base, she saw something that gave her hope. News vans were already gathering outside, and reporters were setting up cameras. Her emergency broadcast had been heard. 3 days later, Rebecca sat in a military detention facility, still in solitary confinement. She had been interrogated for hours by various officials, all demanding to know why she had betrayed her country. But she had refused to recant her testimony or admit wrongdoing. A guard approached her cell and unlocked the door. "You have a visitor, Captain." Rebecca was led to a small meeting room where a woman in a civilian suit was waiting. She introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh, an attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. "Captain Martinez, I want you to know that your broadcast was recorded by multiple civilian radio operators. The coordinates you transmitted have been verified, and investigators are currently examining the site. Rebecca felt a surge of relief. What about the pilot, the woman who crashed near Desert Springs? Jennifer's expression grew serious. That's Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former biochemist who worked for a government contractor. She's alive, but she's also in protective custody. The documents she was carrying detail illegal human experimentation at the facility you helped expose. Rebecca's hands shook as the full implications hit her. Human experimentation. On whom? The missing research team from the University of Nevada. They weren't lost during a geological survey. They were taken to an underground facility and used as test subjects for classified biological weapons research. Rebecca felt sick. Those people had been murdered and she had almost been part of the cover-up. What happens now? Dr. Vasquez is testifying before a closed congressional committee. Your testimony will be crucial in corroborating her claims. The Pentagon is trying to court-martial you to discredit your testimony, but public pressure is building. As Jennifer spoke, Rebecca realized that the woman in the cockpit had known exactly what she was doing. She had chosen to communicate with a military pilot because she knew that testimony from inside the system would be harder to dismiss than claims from a civilian whistleblower. The coordinates she flashed, Rebecca said quietly. There was more than one location. Jennifer nodded grimly. We know. The second set of coordinates led to a mass grave. 17 people, including the missing research team. All of them show signs of having been subjected to chemical experimentation. Rebecca closed her eyes, remembering the woman's face as she desperately flashed those coordinates. She had known she was probably going to die, but she had still risked everything to expose the truth about those 17 people. What about the people responsible? That's where it gets complicated. The facility was being run by a private contractor with ties to several high-ranking Pentagon officials. The investigation is expanding, but there are powerful people who want this buried. Rebecca understood. She had become a liability to those powerful people, which explained why she was being held in solitary confinement while facing treason charges. They were trying to destroy her credibility before she could testify. I need you to know something, Jennifer continued. Dr. Vasquez specifically asked me to thank you. She said you could have followed orders and killed her, but you chose to listen to her message instead. Rebecca felt tears in her eyes. I almost did follow orders. For a moment, I had my finger on the trigger. But you didn't. And because of that choice, 17 murder victims will finally get justice, and the people responsible will face consequences. As Jennifer left, Rebecca was returned to her cell. But for the first time in days, she felt hope. The woman in the cockpit had succeeded in her mission, and Rebecca had played a crucial role in making sure the truth came out. 2 weeks later, Rebecca was released from detention pending her court-martial. The charges hadn't been dropped, but public pressure had forced the military to allow her to testify before Congress. As she walked out of the detention facility, she was greeted by protesters carrying signs reading "Hero, not traitor," and "Justice for Elena Vasquez." Rebecca's testimony before Congress was broadcast live on all major networks. She recounted every detail of her encounter with Dr. Vasquez, from the Morse code coordinates to the photographs and documents she had held up to the cockpit window. Her voice remained steady as she described her decision to break protocol and broadcast the information publicly. "I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic," Rebecca told the committee. "When I saw Dr. Vasquez risk her life to expose the murder of 17 innocent people, I realized that following orders blindly would have made me complicit in covering up those murders." The hearing room erupted in applause, despite the chairman's attempts to maintain order. Rebecca could see her parents in the gallery, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter defend her actions. The Pentagon's representative tried to paint Rebecca as a rogue officer who had compromised national security, but the evidence was overwhelming. The mass grave had been excavated, and forensic evidence confirmed that the 17 victims had been subjected to illegal human experimentation before their deaths. Dr. Vasquez testified via video link from an undisclosed location, still in protective custody. She described the facility where she had worked, the experiments she had witnessed, and her growing horror as she realized what was being done to innocent people. "I tried to report what I was seeing through official channels," Dr. Vasquez testified. "But my supervisors made it clear that anyone who spoke out would face severe consequences. When I learned that the missing research team had been brought to our facility, I knew I had to act." The committee chairman asked Dr. Vasquez to describe her decision to steal the classified documents and attempt to expose the facility. "I knew it was essentially a suicide mission," she admitted. "But I also knew that if I didn't act, more people would die. When I saw Captain Martinez's F-22 approaching, I realized this might be my only chance to get the truth out." Rebecca watched from the witness table as Dr. Vasquez described her desperate attempts to communicate the coordinates and evidence to someone who might listen. The woman's courage was extraordinary, and Rebecca felt honored to have played a role in her mission. The congressional investigation resulted in criminal charges against 12 individuals, including 3 Pentagon officials and the CEO of the private contractor that had run the facility. The underground laboratory was shut down, and new oversight procedures were implemented to prevent similar abuses. Rebecca's court-martial was eventually dismissed amid public pressure and evidence that she had prevented a much larger cover-up. She was quietly transferred to a different unit and allowed to continue her military career, though she knew she would never again be considered for promotion to the highest levels. 6 months after the incident, Rebecca received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple thank you note from Dr. Vasquez, along with a photograph of a memorial service for the 17 victims. Their families had finally been able to lay them to rest with dignity, knowing the truth about how they had died. Rebecca kept the photograph on her desk as a reminder of the choice she had made that day. She had been trained to follow orders without question, but when faced with a woman desperately trying to expose mass murder, she had chosen to listen instead of shoot. The coordinates that Dr. Vasquez had flashed in Morse code had led to justice for 17 innocent people and prevented others from suffering the same fate. Sometimes, Rebecca reflected, the most important orders are the ones you choose not to follow. Years later, Rebecca would become a whistleblower advocate, helping other military personnel navigate the complex ethical challenges of exposing wrongdoing within the system. She never forgot the woman in the cockpit who had risked everything to flash those coordinates, or the split-second decision that had changed both of their lives forever. The F-22 Raptor that Rebecca had flown that day was eventually retired from service, but not before she had a chance to visit it one last time. Standing beside the aircraft that had nearly been used to silence a whistleblower, Rebecca said a quiet prayer for Dr. Elena Vasquez and the 17 people who had died in that underground facility. The coordinates burned in Morse code had led to justice, but more importantly, they had led to the truth. And sometimes, Rebecca knew, that was the most important mission of all.